This is a 2019 Volkswagen Golf Alltrack, and it's a pretty special car if you're looking for something that's practical and enthusiasty. It has all-wheel drive and a shocking amount of room for passengers and stuff, so it's practical. But it also has a manual transmission, and it's really rare. Most people don't even know this car exists, but it does. And today I'm going to review the Golf Alltrack and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, good news, this Golf Alltrack is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is a special one from the final model year with a manual transmission in green. It's a one-owner car. If you know these, you know why this is special, and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Golf Alltrack, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Golf Alltrack, starting with the basics and a little background. Now, as you are no doubt aware, station wagon models have never been as popular here in the United States as in many foreign countries, and particularly in Europe. But despite that, Volkswagen has always been pretty good about offering station wagons in the States, especially compared to other rival brands. Now, Volkswagen began offering a Jetta wagon here in the States, beginning with the Mark IV Jetta in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that continued all the way through the 2015 model year, when for some reason they decided to rename the Jetta wagon as the Golf Sport Wagon. It was the same basic car, still based on the Jetta and the Golf, which were similar, but they changed it to Golf. Now, in 2017, they came out with this, the Alltrack, which was like a raised all-wheel drive kind of SUV-ified version of the Golf Sport Wagon with standard all-wheel drive, and they sold it from 17 to 19, at which point the wagons kind of went away in favor of crossovers. So, given that the Golf Alltrack was essentially an SUV-ified off-roader Golf wagon, let's talk about the changes to it that made it more capable than a standard Golf. For one, all-wheel drive was standard. That was a big deal. The regular Golf Sport Wagon, primarily a front-wheel drive car, this one having all-wheel drive definitely added some of that all-weather security and capability. Next, to further maximize capability, the ground clearance of the Alltrack was raised by about 1.5 inches compared to the standard Golf Sport Wagon, resulting in about 7 inches of ground clearance. By comparison, the RAV4 has about 8.5 inches of ground clearance. So that, a true SUV, more clearance, but this, for a car-based station wagon, was pretty good in terms of ground clearance and being able to go over stuff. And because all-wheel drive was standard, and because they raised it up, they also needed to add plastic cladding. That's just what you do when you're doing this stuff. So you have plastic cladding over the wheel arches, down the side of the car. Obviously, in theory, this is to protect you from off-roading debris that might scratch your paint, but really, it's just intended to make it look a little bit more capable, which honestly it kind of does compared to the regular Golf wagon. Interestingly, the changes didn't just stop there. This car also had skid plates. You can see a little skid plate in front, I guess to protect your underbody stuff, and same deal in back, a little skid plate back there. Nothing huge, but it had them. And maybe most impressively, there was an off-road driving mode that this car had. In addition to your regular drive modes, there was an off-road mode, which included an electronic differential lock. This was not driver selectable. It would go on automatically when you were in the off-road driving mode when it detected that it needed it, but still, that's a pretty impressive feature for this car. And it even had a downhill assist function to help keep your brakes cooler and sort of minimize your speed downhill when you were on a rough trail off-roading, which is a pretty impressive off-road feature. And there was even an off-road information section in the infotainment screen that gave you a few pieces of off-road information goodies that you could look at while you were off the pavement driving through all the big old trails in your raised Volkswagen Golf Sport Wagon. And to further emphasize its capabilities, of course, they didn't just call it the Golf Sport Wagon, but they called it the Alltrack, as I've obviously mentioned, and you had some badging around the car to that effect. In back, you had an Alltrack badge letting people know it could go over all tracks, and you also had a little one here on the side, on the front fender, a little Alltrack badge, just as a reminder that this wasn't your typical Golf Sport Wagon, it was the off-roader version. But anyway, beyond all the Alltrack upgrades compared to the standard Golf Sport Wagon, let's talk through some of the other quirks and features on this car. On the outside, there aren't really very many, which was kind of a nice thing about this car. It actually had sort of a simple, clean look, wasn't very try-hard. It just looked nice, attractive, without too much stuff going on. With that said, there's a few things worth mentioning. For one, I always loved the look of the turn signals up front. You had these running lights that had a very distinctive pattern, and when you put on the turn signals, they took the place of the running lights and mimicked that pattern, which is a pretty cool thing. Instead of like a little horizontal square or a line, they have this sort of U shape around the lights. It's a pretty cool look, and I always thought that was a nice distinctive touch that they did. But in terms of distinctive touches, nothing is as quirky or as special as the tailgate handle in back. You walk up to this car and you see there's no very obvious latch to open the tailgate, and that's because it's integrated into the Volkswagen badge. You press the top of the badge, the bottom part comes out, you pull on that, and you open up the tailgate. The badge becomes the tailgate latch, which is a really clever way of integrating that. Not only does it kind of give the badge a cool purpose, but it also cleans up the look of the rear end. You don't have to put a separate handle back there or run a button above the license plate like other cars. It really does give it kind of a more special, more distinctive touch, and I think that was a really cool feature. Now, beyond that stuff, one other important exterior quirk of this particular Alltrack is its color, which is green. Volkswagen called it Great Falls Green, which is named after like an outdoor area near their headquarters in Northern Virginia, Great Falls in Virginia. And it's certainly an unusual color for this car, although it is very much the car enthusiast kind of color choice. Instead of your usual silvers or grays, to get this car in green, and that's particularly true when you open it up and see that it has a brown interior. So this is green over brown, and it has a 6-speed manual transmission. It really is the car enthusiast kind of car nerd dream, a green-brown station wagon with a manual. And by the way, one very quirky thing about this particular manual Alltrack, it has adaptive cruise control for a manual transmission, meaning that it will speed up and slow down depending on the speed of the car in front of you, even though it has a manual. The way it functions is it allows you to keep shifting gears, change to whatever gear you want, and all it does is control your speed. Now, it turns off below about 20 miles an hour, so it won't bring you to a full stop because obviously then you would stall the car at the clutch, but it will adaptively cruise control you, slow down, speed up, depending on the car in front, even though you're shifting gears in the process. Very rare you see adaptive cruise in a manual, but this car has it. And next up, since we're already talking through some interior quirks and features, let's climb in and get to the rest of them, starting with the key, which is a folding key. You press the button, the key pops out. It's pretty cool, but it's old school. We've all seen this by now. The interesting thing here, though, is the car doesn't actually use the folding key. This is a push-button start car. There's nowhere to put the folding key into a slot to turn it on. Obviously, some lower trims of the Golf and Jetta probably use that folding key, but this one doesn't, and yet it still retains the folding key, which is definitely a little quirky. Now, once you climb inside, you go past the door sill where you see an Alltrack logo, and you get in expecting to be bombarded with more reminders that you're in the special off-roady version, but you're not. In fact, there's no Alltrack logos anywhere in this interior except for this one little spot above the gear selector in the center. You can see it says Alltrack right here on this little storage compartment lid, but that's it, aside from the door sills, which obviously you can't see while the car is moving. Just that one little Alltrack badge, that's all you get reminding you of your special capabilities. But anyway, moving on in the center console, one thing I've always loved about Volkswagen and Audi models from this era is the adjustable height armrest. This panel here isn't just a center console storage lid, although it's that. You can lift it up and there's a little storage compartment below, but you can also set the height of it. As you lift it, it locks into place to exactly fit precisely where you prefer your comfortable armrest height to be, which is kind of a cool touch that was sort of unique to these cars. But anyway, next we move up to the center control stack, starting with the climate controls. A couple of interesting things about the climate controls, starting with when the climate controls are off, it displays off in the little temperature display area, but the second F in off is much smaller because it uses the F for degrees Fahrenheit. Now that is showing F. So you have OF. F, but I guess it does tell you that it's off. Now, the other interesting thing is that when you're using the climate controls and you pull up the climate control menu in the infotainment screen, it doesn't really give you any additional climate controls in the screen than what you already have as physical buttons down below. So there is a climate control menu in the infotainment screen, but it's completely redundant and not really important and not really usable in any way, since you already have all of those controls physical down below. I suppose you could use the climate control menu if you wanted, or you could just not and keep using your physical controls. It's rare to see a car that has both completely replicated. Now, on the subject of this infotainment system, it has one rather unusual feature that Volkswagen was known for in this era, which is it senses when your fingers are approaching it to try to touch something or make a selection, and it makes the menu items larger so that you have an easier time touching something. And then when your fingers go away and you go back on the steering wheel or put your hands back down, the menu items get smaller and the display gets larger to show you what's on there. It's actually a pretty cool idea, right? You're trying to touch something, you want it to be bigger so you have an easier time tapping it, and when you're not touching it, you don't need it to be as big anymore and you want to see the display larger, so it does that. It's a pretty neat feature. I've never really seen that in other cars, but Volkswagens from this era do have it. And they have some other interesting things in the infotainment as well. One is the Think Blue Trainer, which is a feature in this car that actually gives you a score as you're driving along based on how economically and efficiently you're driving. And the score will get higher or lower depending on your efficiency. So the more efficiently you're driving, the higher your score, which I guess they were thinking will actually make you try to drive more efficiently and get better fuel economy, seeing that real-time score display, almost like playing a game while you're driving. Now, another interesting thing that this infotainment system does is it will show you exactly what's consuming a lot of energy. So, like for instance, if you have the AC all the way on, it will show you that, hey, the climate control is consuming energy, it's zapping your fuel economy, and if you want to improve your miles per gallon, you might want to turn that off. And obviously it'll show you that if you have other accessories on as well, which can be useful in figuring out, hey, how do I improve my fuel economy? What can I turn off and live without? Interestingly, this infotainment system also has an images section, which I guess would allow you to put pictures on in case you wanted to check it out and then look at images in your infotainment screen. I'm not really sure exactly what that's for, but it's there. This is definitely a bit of a weird and quirky infotainment system, but it's worth pointing out that this car does come with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Even though this is sort of an older, previous generation Volkswagen model, that feature is included here. So you don't have to use Volkswagen's rather esoteric infotainment system, but you can if you want, especially if you want that Think Blue Trainer letting you know how efficiently you're driving. Now, moving on to the gauge cluster, where of course you have another screen. This one is a little pixelated black and white screen. There's no full gauge cluster screen here. In fact, your gauges are old school analog and your screen is just the black and white one in the middle, although it is actually surprisingly useful as I take a look at it. It shows, for example, you can see car information if you want. You can also change your music in here. You can make a call from here, and you can even get navigation directions from here. And the screen shows a little mini Alltrack driving along on the route where you're supposed to drive. Obviously, this isn't really a match for some of the modern full screen infotainment gauge clusters, but it's just as good as some of them. I'm surprised at how unconfigurable some modern gauge cluster screens are, and this one has basically all of the same functionality as some modern screens without any of the color or the size, but it's still pretty useful. And next up, we move on to the back seat, which is actually fairly roomy. I mean, it's obviously not massive and luxurious, but it has at least as much space as a similarly sized compact crossover, Honda CR-V, Toyota RAV4, etc. from this era, which is a surprise considering this car is called a Golf. Even though it's the wagon version, when you think Golf, you think of a tiny little economy car, but this one actually has decent space in back. You could certainly use this as a family crossover like you might use a RAV4 or a CR-V. Now, a few interesting points worth mentioning back here. For one, you do have rear seat climate vents, which you don't always see in a car in this segment, sort of the compact car class, but it adds a little bit of comfort and convenience for your rear passengers. Now, with that said, one drawback is that you don't have any power ports back here. You can tell this car is a little bit older than the newest, most modern stuff because rear seat power ports are a must in today's cars, and they just weren't in everything back in 17, and that includes this. No rear power ports, and indeed, another drawback is that your middle passenger is screwed back here. Because this is an all-wheel drive car, there's a drive line going through the middle, and that goes right under the center of the car and robs the middle passenger of all the legroom in back, which is a little unfortunate. And another drawback is that the middle seat back, it pops down and reveals cup holders, but those are your only cup holders in the back seat. So if you want a place to store your drinks, you better not have anybody riding with you in the center. Not a big deal. Most people don't usually have 3 across seating in a car, but if you do have 3 people back here, you're gonna have some compromises. With that said, one other interesting item, a little bit of rear seat cost cutting on the door panel. You can see up front when the door is open, there's this little strip of LED lighting that is on. In back when the door is open, you do not have that little lighting strip. Only the front passengers are deemed important enough for their door to have a little light up LED situation. Sorry, rear seat people, but at least you'll be comfortable in a fairly roomy back seat. And next up, we move on to the cargo area in the Alltrack. Open up the tailgate, little Volkswagen badge in back, pop it open, and you discover actually a pretty practical cargo area. Again, pretty similar in size to what you'd expect to find in a crossover of this size from this era, CR-V, RAV4, etc. And it has some really nice practical touches. For one thing, you can open up the floor, lift it up, and you can see the spare tire is under here, but you obviously have enough space for extra items that you might want to put if you want to keep them out of sight or if you don't want them rolling around in back. You got decent extra storage space down there, and there's also some nice extra storage space on the side of the cargo area. You can see down here this little compartment for extra smaller items, and same deal over on the other side. In case you have smaller, more fragile stuff that you don't want rolling around, you got a space for it. Other nice practical touches in back in this car, the rear seats can be folded from back here. This little latch on the side of the cargo area, you pull that and the rear seat instantly folds down. And of course, you also have one over on the other side that does the same thing. That's kind of nice if you have some big, large item you're trying to load in. You don't actually have to go around to the seats and do them individually. You can do them with these latches in back, which adds to your convenience. And another really cool feature back here, you have 2 power ports. One is a 12-volt cigarette lighter style port, but you also have a household style power port back here, which is really cool to see, especially on a car from this era. You don't often find household ports except in the very newest cars. And even then, I wish they were in more vehicles, but here in this one, you got a household power port, which is a nice, convenient feature to have. You can charge your devices beyond just your typical USB-C phones and iPads, etc. 2 other interesting quirks back here. For one, there is a 2-stage cargo cover. And by that, what I mean is you can close the cargo cover all the way, like in basically every other car, but you can also close it halfway if you want. I'm not exactly sure why you'd want to do that, to only cover half your cargo area so people can't see half your cargo if they're trying to break in, but you can do that if you want. I guess if you have some tall item and some smaller stuff, maybe that is a way you could do that. Now, the other interesting thing is closing the cargo area. On the inside of the tailgate, there's little icons that guide you to a spot where you can put your hands in order to close the tailgate. That way, you don't have to reach out to the outside of the car, put your hands on the car car, get your hands dirty, get the car all fingerprinted. You actually have these individual spots inside the tailgate where you're being told, this is where you close me, so you can close it and keep everything clean. And finally, we move under the hood in the Alltrack, where of course we discover the powertrain. Now, the owner of this car tells me that everybody is always asking him if this is a diesel, probably because it's such a car enthusiast nerd spec. Green, brown wagon with a manual, but in fact, it isn't. These cars, these Alltracks, were built from 17 to 19. That was after the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal, which means that none of these cars had a diesel powertrain. In fact, every Alltrack that was sold here in the States was powered by a 1.8-liter turbo four-cylinder, made about 170 horsepower and about 200 pound-feet of torque. Not a huge figure, not particularly powerful or sporty, but pretty much what you'd expect for this type of car at this price point, which back when it was new 7 or 8 years ago would have been about $35,000. That was roughly the sticker price of this car back then. It was a pretty cool buy at that price point. But you might be wondering what happened. There is no more station wagon, Golf, or Jetta, or Passat, or wagon of any kind in Volkswagen's lineup. So where did it go? And the answer is they just migrated to crossovers. Volkswagen was always the unusual one, offering a wagon, a Jetta wagon, a Passat wagon, but even Volkswagen eventually decided that the buyers wanted SUVs. This went away after the 19 model year, coinciding basically at the same time as the launch of a brand new redesigned Tiguan, and then a couple years later, Volkswagen came out with a new small crossover called the Taos, and now Volkswagen has made the switch from the cool esoteric wagons to the more traditional and more popular crossover SUV. But this can still be a pretty good family SUV alternative if you want a small crossover, but you're looking for something a little more interesting and quirky and cool. And with that in mind, you might be wondering how this drives, so let's get it out on the road and find out. All right, driving the Golf Alltrack. This car has a huge cult following, and for good reason. There's not a lot of cars that combine crossover practicality, you know, family friendliness. I mean, this car has the cargo area, like you saw, is as big as a little crossover, like a Tiguan or a CR-V. The back seat, same deal. Like, this car is absolutely family enough, family practical enough for a lot of people. And yet, you still get a car driving experience, car, you know, lowness, despite the Alltrack lift. It's still no SUV in terms of height. And you get a manual transmission with all-wheel drive. And a manual all-wheel drive car in today's world is really only limited to the very, very craziest cars, and then also this. Now, despite the, on paper, enthusiastness of this car, I will say I've always been a little disappointed we didn't get like a higher performance version. Overseas, there is a Golf R wagon, which would be an amazing combination of stuff. This car with its powertrain, 170 horsepower, 200 pound-feet, those are healthy numbers, but they're not going to win any awards in terms of power and performance. I always felt it would have been cooler if there had been a performance version too. But at the end of the day, you got a manual all-wheel drive wagon in today's world. You should be just happy enough that such a thing exists. And it's not like it's slow. On the contrary, it's actually pretty quick. It's just not like, you don't have sports suspension, you don't have, you know, sports steering, you don't have crazy acceleration. Like, it's not a performance car, but it is a car that injects a lot more enjoyment into the world of the small crossover, which is pretty cool. Now, the reason this car has a cult following is because there are enough people who want that, but then there's not many of these. They only made them for 3 model years. With a manual, it's even rarer. A top trim like this one, like, this is a special car. And when they come up for sale, they bring big money, but the good news is they also sell for big money later. So there's a significant cost to buy one of these, but if you can hold it and sell it after 3-4 years, whatever, you need something bigger, something different, you really seem to come out okay with these cars. It's shocking what they bring because there's so much interest in them. All right, let's go for it here. Floor it. Yeah, I mean, it's got decent power. And I've driven this engine in other vehicles, and I think it's good. It's relatively potent, and if you keep it higher in the rev range, you have a pretty good response in terms of like flooring it from 40 to 60 miles an hour, like getting on a freeway or something. It has pretty good power. I will say that once you get going at that speed, it doesn't necessarily feel like planted and low. This is definitely not a performance car, I guess is all I'm saying. It's enthusiasty in the sense that it's a manual all-wheel drive wagon, but it's more family car than performance car. And frankly, it's certainly more off-roady type car than performance car also. Like, it is lifted, it does have the differential lock thing. Like, this car is intended to be a lifestyle version of a already non-enthusiast station wagon. Now, if you look at the driving experience, not from the perspective of hoping it's going to be this performance car, I gotta say it's pretty good. Like, if your alternative is a Tiguan or an Escape or a CR-V, and here you are in this manual wagon, like, that actually is pretty cool. And everything works reasonably well in terms of the enthusiast aspects of the car. You have a good clutch that's pretty easy. It's nice and smooth, very easy to figure out. It's linear. You never see these on the road ever. And when you do, they probably don't have manual transmissions, and they're probably not this unusual green-brown combination. And this is just it's a cool car. It's a special car, and it's interesting, and it adds a little bit more excitement and rarity and specialness to the otherwise impressively dull world of the small crossover. And for that reason, I think this car is really neat. Also, adaptive cruise control on a manual car, that's really cool. Like, this car has some neat things about it. I'm excited that they did it. I totally understand why they don't do it anymore, but I'm glad for a short little burst there we got this ridiculous car, and that it's still pretty usable as a family vehicle and feels pretty modern and pretty nice to drive. And so that's the 2019 Volkswagen Golf Alltrack. This is a special alternative to a family car that's just as practical and just as usable, but more fun, more interesting, and more rare. And you can buy this one on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give the Golf Alltrack a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 46 out of 100, which puts the Golf Alltrack here against some similar cars. From an overall standpoint, it's fairly similar to a Toyota RAV4 from the same year, but while the RAV4 is a bit better daily driver as it's more reliable, more practical, the Golf is more exciting and interesting. Both accomplish roughly the same goal though, so if you want to inject a bit more excitement into the very unexciting world of the small SUV, the Golf Alltrack makes that possible.